Hello and welcome. In this episode we are going to talk about developments on the front line in Ukraine. We're talking a little more about Kherson and a lot of propaganda that's going around there. We are talking about political issues, infighting in Russia. We are talking about the mobilization efforts, and of course we are going to talk about the Ukrainian invasion on the Kinburn Spit. That's the peninsula that is south of Kherson on the other side of the Dnipro, that was spreading around yesterday on Twitter and on the according media. Right now there is a massive Russian cruise missile attack on Ukraine. Over 100 cruise missiles have likely been fired, or roughly 100. Most of them seem to be Kh-101 fired from Tupolev 95 strategic bombers. In most of Ukraine, power has been cut due to the attacks. The attack is currently ongoing, so I can't really say much more, but that is the situation we have right now. When it comes to the Eastern Front, in this war, we have reported an attack on Ternova from the Russians. I think yesterday it was supported with attacks from attack helicopters, but the Ukrainians have defeated the attack. These attacks, we had them here and we had them somewhere in this region, I think, or somewhere along the border, more or less. Those attacks are meant to draw Ukrainian troops in, to distract them, to force the Ukrainians to basically keep the whole international border with Russia and Belarus guarded, thus fixing troops there in place that can't be used anywhere else. That this is a serious attack of gaining territory close to Kharkiv again can be, we can be sure that this is not the true at this very moment. The reports from both sides, especially from the Russians, show clearly that the Ukraine still has the initiative when it comes to the front line north of the Siversky Donetsk. Russians are reporting a lot of different attacks going towards them. They report all of them defeated. Ukraine itself is also reporting Russian attacks, far less though, and they are defeated. We have one confirmed change in territory, and that's here in Makhivka, which was so far contested, so there were still Russians in. Now we have reports from the Russian side itself that they withdrew from it. So while the front line isn't really moving, the Ukrainians have captured one town. That was it for the last 3 days from what I found. Both sides basically agree that it's the Ukrainians who still hold the initiative, who do more attacks, who do the more serious attacks, but we do not have any, or at least much results that can be presented out of those attacks. Bilohorivka again is being assaulted. We again have words that the Russians are in the southeastern outskirts of Bilohorivka. It's still contested, so it seems to be that both sides hold some territory inside of Bilohorivka, but it hasn't changed hand completely yet. South of it, basically the whole front line is on fire. I'm not going to start to mention too many towns, but we have an attack in the direction of Verkhnokamianske. We have attacks in the direction of Spirne, Bakhmut itself, south of it, Odradivka, west of it. We have, the Russians are reporting that they have captured Mayorska. Along the whole front line, more or less, there's fighting. I could probably mention every second town, and that's a reported attack in the last 3 days, but the Russians don't have that much to show for apart from Mayorska, which seems to be captured. Inside of Bakhmut, we have reported by the Ukrainians that the Russians used chemical weapons, but it's less dramatic than it sounds initially. So the report is that it's against the Convention for Chemical Weapons, the usage of it, but what was used were K-51 grenades, and I found them here. That's CS gas, riot control gas. Apparently that's against the Convention of Usage of Chemical Weapons. This is a non-lethal chemical weapon, but from my understanding it's still illegal to use them in war. But obviously it's a little bit different whether they've used sarin gas, mustard gas, DX gas or CS gas. In that case, they have used K-51, at least the Ukrainians say so, again, with a little, I have not seen proof of the Russians having used those. But for me, that usage is far less dramatic than it initially sounds. You might see that differently. Then write your comments in the descriptions. I always have some who believe that I must be a Ukrainian cheerleader here, otherwise my channel is of no worth. But if you believe so, write that in the comments. So from what it seems, the Ukrainian at least claim that the Russians have used chemical weapons, but then again, like, to put it in some perspective, supposedly what was used was CS gas. Further south of it, as said, we have attacks more or less along the whole front line around Avdiivka again. Mayorska is being captured. It seems highly likely that Opytne, the Russians actually entered, so they gained a little more ground south of Avdiivka. They will likely try to bypass it and then force a Ukrainian withdrawal. And further south, we have reports that they gained some ground. Let me see. I think it was... Yeah, Marivka was recently that they gained some ground, but not recently, not since the last situation report, but the attacks were on Marivka as well from what I've seen. And now in Pavlivka, again, they claim that they've captured the whole town, which might be true at this point. I don't have a full confirmation yet, but I think it's safe to assume that it's a high possibility that the Russians have actually captured Pavlivka as of now. So generally, we can say massive Russian attacks more or less along the whole front line between Vuhledar and Bilohorivka. The Russians achieve small territorial gains here and there, but we are really talking about a few hundred meters at 2-3 points. That's more or less it. That's all the result of heavy attacks like we haven't heard in quite a while within the last 3 days. In Kherson, we have news that we have now confirmation Ukraine has full control over everything on the right bank of the Dnipro. There are some claimants, you'll find them on Twitter, that Ukraine has gained big loot there. They captured tons of equipment again, but I can't really find much. Now we have some images, like here for instance we see a 1V119. It should be based on the BMD-4, or at least on the BMD series. It's like a command and control vehicle. Here we have a video that is being spread around, but let me come to this right now. Here we have a video of a Mi-8. I also saw a video of an Mi-24 that was being captured by the Ukrainians, but it's probably safe to assume that they are not airworthy. We can even see it's being opened here where the turbine is. So that helicopter is probably not airworthy, and this video is being spread around as an example of how much they've captured. But the issue is the author of that YouTube channel is explaining the different types of weaponry. He's not showing big masses, and I have yet to see them. So as of now, I cannot confirm that the Ukrainians gained massive amounts of captured equipments. We have single items proven. We have some destruction being proven, but I at least have not seen as of yet anything that's close to what we've seen in Izium, where on the first day we saw videos of Ukrainian soldiers walking around and he's just turning around and showing on his camera 5 or 6 T-72, which at least from a visual inspection seem to be absolutely in running condition. They seem to be in a perfect condition, but they were just parked there somewhere in the woods and a Ukrainian soldier walked through that. We have nothing close to that from Kherson. So as of now, I assume that the Ukrainians have not captured too much yet. It might turn out differently. As said, I can only judge what I found, only the things that I have visual proof, and that's what I stick to. I try to stick as much to what I can actually prove, not what I would like to see or what some Twitter rumors are spreading around. Ukraine is also saying that 15,000 paintings have been stolen from Kherson, including the art museum. So this is among that what I reported in the past, that there were reports from theft and grand looting, including from cultural items out of Kherson. And we have the report here, an article from CNN. According to that, CNN is saying that the according to them, Russia probably held back with the withdrawal to not strengthen to strengthen the Republicans in the midterms, because if the recapture of Kherson had been reported or announced before the midterms, Russia expected the Republicans to gain less. We talked about that in the past. My assumption was that it wouldn't change much if the Republicans gained the majority, because while there is a faction inside of the Republicans opposing helping Ukraine, there's also a faction of that in the Democrats. It doesn't need to be compared in size. The Republican faction might be bigger, but supporting Ukraine is a bipartisan effort, so I was not seriously worried that the change of control of the houses would change much of it. But obviously in Russia they will also have heard voices from the Republicans that Ukraine will not get a blank check in case the Republicans take over Congress, etc., even though it was clear that Ukraine didn't get a blank check from the Democrats either. So this is something that CNN is reporting, US intelligence is suggesting it, and it seems kind of credible to my mind, because why not try? As said, I don't believe I'm smarter and more educated and have more insight than a well-trained Russian intelligence officer. So I don't think there was serious hope that a Republican takeover of both houses of Congress would mean the end of support for Ukraine. But why not try if you can afford it? So it seems kind of credible, this report here. And then we have another report that the Russians supposedly have a raccoon. A raccoon was in the Kherson zoo and now it's missing. So Ukraine is saying the Russian soldiers stole a raccoon from the zoo and took it over on the other side of the river. And of course the memes are starting to appear that I went to Kherson and all I got was 2 washing machines and a raccoon, for instance. Things like this. Obviously, this is more humorous than anything serious. Whether they actually steal a raccoon seems kind of ludicrous, but who knows. A Polish journalist right now is saying that there has been a deal between Russia, Ukraine, and USA to withdraw the troops, but it's his word. He seems to be the only one who claims he has proof or who claims to know it. So we should consider it absolutely unproven. I said something like this myself in the past, but and this is a distinction which might have been overlooked, but I made clear that to me it looks like it. I never claimed it is the fact. I never claimed that I have proof or anything like this. To me, it is suspicious that we don't see massive losses, that we see Russian soldiers walking across the swimming bridge, the barge bridge, without being under fire, as I would have expected the Ukrainians to pummel the bridgehead, to pummel the ferry points with everything they have while they advance, to cause losses as big as possible, as obviously every soldier they take out at that moment they will never have to face again. But we have not seen that, and that led me to the suspicion that there might have been an agreement between both sides to allow for the Russians to leave in exchange for something that they return in there to make up for that for the permission to leave freely. I said it's pure speculation. I'm somewhat surprised that we don't have any indication of serious Ukrainian attempts to shell the Russian withdrawal, especially on the river where the troop concentration must have been and where it was predictable. But that's an assumption, that's speculation, nothing more of this. And one Polish journalist claiming to know that doesn't change anything about that either. When we come to the southern front, we are obviously going to talk about the invasion on Kinborn Spit. But right now we have news from Melitopol. Men are being forced to start digging trenches and build fortifications. So the Russians are continuing to build defense in depth. We see that from the left side of the Dnipro as well. Obviously, left side is the east here, as it's always seen in the direction of the flow of the river. The Russians are still building defensive positions there, and they are preparing defense in depth. So this should not be understood that the Russians expect the Ukrainians to be at the entry of Crimea within 2 weeks just because they rebuilt some trenches here. We should not expect them to, we should not guess that the Russians expect the Ukrainians to be in Melitopol in a week. But a proper preparation means when you see yourself on the defensive, you prepare a defense in depth to stop an enemy even after a breakthrough, because you still have prepared positions. So we shouldn't overestimate that. That's rather proper logic, proper military logic by the Russians to do that. Now there are big. Yesterday was full of rumors of a Ukrainian invasion on the Kinburn Spit. Kinburn Spit is this here. It's mostly marshland from my understanding. So marshland, very few roads that can be used, and there were videos like this being spread around, which is supposed to show Ukrainian forces going in the direction of the Kinburn Spit. As to say of now, I can show you this first here. We see this here saying this morning in the village of Pokrovskoye at the Kinburn Spit, a sabotage group of the 73rd Centre d'Opération Spéciale Maritime des Forces Armées Ukrainiennes a été détruit. So a sabotage group of the 73rd Center of Operation, Special Operation, or Center of Naval Special Operation of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have been destroyed, a source said. That's up here. And they also that they defeated at the top of the Kinburn Spit. So we had Russian channels saying the Ukrainians have tried to land and have been destroyed. At that time, those videos appeared, but we have no confirmation, and we have no confirmation from the Ukrainian side of anything happening. So more or less it's guesswork as of now. I found this channel here, and it says it wouldn't make sense to attack here because it's one of Kinburn Spit is ideal for the Russians to use loitering munition to strike into the Ukrainian back. Then we have an indication here that the Russians prepared defenses. I don't think we should say that they have retreated to that already. I don't see from those satellite images a proof of them already having retreated. We just see them having prepared defensive positions behind Heroiske, which is here. So more or less that is supposed to be here, but that doesn't mean they have already retreated. Now, just to make it clear, I don't see any confirmation that there even has been a landing, let alone that they still control it. So what should we make of it? It's fairly possible that it was a special operation. We have proof of Ukrainians going over the Dnipro reservoir and striking in the Russian back in this area here in Ehodar and around that. So that they would do it in this way wouldn't surprise us. We had reports, I reported it here weeks ago, that supposedly Iranian instructors were here on the Kinburn Spit to help the Russians launch drones or the Shahid 136 loitering munition from here to attack a position like this. When you identify it, lightly defend it, to destroy it, to take out the personnel, to blow up the drones that might be stored there, makes perfect military sense. This doesn't mean though that it is a proper invasion, because anything we see from here looks like a stalemate. It's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians will be able to supply any landing on the Kinburn Spit with significant heavy weapons, so that they will be able to send off tons of tanks and then keep them supplied. Whereas it seems to be difficult for the Russians, at least if the reports I read are true, and the ground is muddy and bogged down and there are small canals everywhere and it's marshland, then for the Russians to counterattack seems pretty difficult as well. So what we would have in the end is more or less infantry on one side, mostly infantry, mostly Ukrainian forces infantry on one side, and a fortified position of the Russians on the other side, supported with heavy weapons, where it would be extremely difficult for the Ukrainians to break through without armored support, which more or less would mean they might theoretically be able to build a bridgehead there, and they might theoretically be able to hold it. But I don't see how it would be of much use for them, because I don't see the big opportunity for them to bring in heavy weapons, especially as it's in artillery range of the Russians. And it's not really an area where you have much opportunity to hide your heavy weapons. So it would be under constant attack, and every heavy weapon you bring in is under permanent threat of being destroyed from distance with artillery, loitering munitions, etc. So that this here leads to anything because that the Ukrainians are then able to break through the Russian defenses, which can be supported with heavy weapons, with tanks, with IFVs, while they are most likely on foot, seems less likely. So any permanent occupation of this, I don't see the bigger picture. I don't see how that would lead to the Ukrainians achieving anything but a symbolic success, and whether it's worth sacrificing your soldiers, because they will be pummeled there with artillery. Every time they get supplied, the Russians will try to ambush that, to shoot missiles on the boats coming, etc. Every time this is done, the Ukrainians are likely suffering casualties. And just for the fact, like, once I found one suggestion, because this is the last part of Mykolaiv that's still occupied for the Russians. Symbols are good and symbols are important in war, but I don't see the justification to do that. So I might be wrong here, as usual. I'm judging on a very limited amount of information, so I'm giving my opinion, but I hope I was able to explain why I think a serious amphibic operation there that is intended to create a bridgehead, that is intended to be held or even expanded, seems highly unlikely in my mind. When we continue further in that direction, we have one report that the Russians, the Ukrainians are saying the Russians have shelled a town on the Dnipro, on the left bank. So on the side of the Dnipro that they themselves control with mortars. So the Ukrainians are saying Russians shelled more or less their own village. You need to understand, I mean, the village they themselves control, and the Ukrainians are saying they did it because the population had refused to get evacuated or deported, depending on which side you want to believe more in this regard. We haven't heard that for the first time. It's not completely unbelievable, but I leave it like this for you to judge whether you want to believe that report or not. Before we come to the mobilization, let's do a quick summary. Kherson on the right bank of the Dnipro is liberated. It's fairly unlikely that this was a serious naval invasion that is meant to stay and especially meant to be expanded. That's the important part. There might be saying we can easily defend that with a few troops, and by taking it we can prevent the Russians from using it further for continued use with loitering munition. I don't see the huge benefit of that, but that might at least theoretically be a possibility. Apart from that, there were one report after the other, and that fits with the Kinburn Spit naval invasion in the last few days. Just to summarize a few, while the Ukrainians were still advancing, I read that 20,000 Russians are bulked up on the ferry points and are currently being hammered with Ukrainian MLRS, while Ukrainian forces have already crossed the reservoir and are in Kakhovka and are expanding on that side. In combination with this here, with Kinburn Spit, I read that the Ukrainians have also already crossed the river at other positions and are advancing. Right now, before I started recording, I found on Twitter it was claimed that Lavrov and the Russian delegation were thrown out at G20 in Bali, were kicked out and forced to leave. I checked on that and I didn't find anything on that either. Right now we have a wave of pro-Ukrainian accounts on Twitter that seem to be inventing anything that seems partway credible to cater to their audience, to their pro-Ukrainian audience. The amount of fake news, of pro-Ukrainian fake news I've seen within the last 5 to 7 days is massive. So if you see any report that seems to be good to be true, that seems too fantastic to be true, just consider it is probably too fantastic to be true. Keep your skepticism. Just because the Ukrainians are advancing right now doesn't mean they are suddenly Superman and the Russian armed forces have ceased to exist. This front line here, I guess, will more or less be stable for a while. I don't expect the Ukrainians to go over the river in serious force anytime soon. I said I might be wrong, and I might have to correct myself in the next situation report or two, that the Russians have actually been pushed out of the Kinburn Spit, and maybe the Ukrainians are even advancing there. But unless I'm completely wrong there, I don't expect massive development here. So from now on, I will no longer take Kherson as a separate point in my situation report, because we now have a southern front line going along this, which as of now is more or less stable, and I expect it to be stable on the western half of it, on this area, for the time being, whereas we might see massive movement here. This here, right now, it is still quiet, but this is the most likeliest point for both sides to move some troops. It's the most tempting target for the Ukrainians to start their next offensive, while the Russians will reinforce it, but it seems more likely that the Russian will focus on capturing the rest of Donbass, so the majority of their free troops should probably arrive in this area, not necessarily in this. Along here we see the ongoing Russian attacks that achieve little, but they do achieve a little. And north of it, we have the ongoing Ukrainian attacks, which don't achieve that much either. But we can more or less summarize: the Ukrainian side has the initiative from the border down to Bilohorivka, and from Bilohorivka to Vuhledar, the Russians have the initiative. Nothing much has changed in this regard. When we come to mobilization, we have reports that wounded volunteers have been classified as deserters in Russia. The Russian authorities are being accused they do this to save on the benefits, as obviously a soldier that has been wounded has to have his medical needs being paid for, and he might have to get a pension if he's unable to work afterwards, whereas if he's a deserter, it's all his fault and it's his problem. There are accusations like this. There seems to be some credibility for it, because we have reports from Russia that at least in some cases it was claimed this is a mistake and has been reverted. So the so-called deserters were then being reclassified as active soldiers that are just wounded. But all of this could be an indication that either the Russians have a complete chaos when it comes to understanding where their soldiers actually are, or that the Russian government is running out of money and is trying to save money by denying benefits to soldiers that have been wounded. Supposedly, that's coming from the Ukrainian side. They claim that Russia is about to create an Orthodox PMC, so a private military company, mercenary company that is supposed to be Orthodox, and the claim is that the Russian Orthodox Church is going to lead that PMC. Now, this sounds completely ridiculous, because we all have heard the 10 Commandments, including those shall not kill. But we need to understand that the Patriarch Kirill, who is the current leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, not only has he been a KGB agent before, but right now in this war he has done something that is unique in Orthodox history. I have studied medieval history as well, and I followed the siege of Constantinople. I did studies about that, about the Crusades, about Byzantium's war against the Arabs, against the Muslims. And one of the big issues for the Byzantium emperors always was that they didn't have anything what Urban II introduced with the beginning of the Crusades, a promise that if you fight dying the disbelievers, the infidels, that you go to heaven. Orthodoxy has never introduced that. The Byzantian, the emperors of Constantinople were always begging their church for it, that they would introduce something like this, and the church refused it for centuries until Byzantium was no more. And Kirill this year has done the unthinkable. He actually claimed that if you fight in this war, you go into heaven. He promised a paradise for everyone fighting in this war for Russia. As this is such a break with tradition, which was mostly overlooked by international observers, but to me was like a tremendous event in 2000 years of Christianity, a tremendous and important event in the context of history. As this was done by Kirill, I think he's Kirill II, as this was done by the Russian Orthodox Church this time, it does not seem completely unbelievable that they might start recruiting their own soldiers to fight for their holy war as well. As said, I have heard it, I think it was the speaker for the governor of Odessa who claimed that, but as of now, I don't have any proof of it, but I just wanted to give some historic context. While in these circumstances, there might be some small sliver of possibility that it might actually be true this time, even though it might sound completely unbelievable to us at the very moment. Also, Putin has signed a few more decrees. From now on, foreigners can serve in the Russian armed forces in a way that now double citizens can be drafted. Before, they seem to have been excluded, as they probably are considered to have split loyalty. And also, it seems that foreign residents can now be recruited. So everyone inside of Russia that's a legal resident might face himself to be drafted to the Russian armed forces fairly soon. He also proposed a law to the Duma, if I understood it correctly, and it would allow the Russian government, Russian offices, Russian institutions, the Russian structure basically, to take away citizenship if you spread fake news about the Russian military. So we have to see, obviously, from the Russian point of view, from the Russian propaganda point of view. If you say we are getting defeated, then you might be considered spreading fake news and thus could lose your citizenship. Also, when you participate in extremist organizations, or if you demand or if you propose the violation of Russian territorial integrity. Everything of this is obviously threatening freedom of speech, but the important thing about this is that it seems to be only focusing at naturalized citizens. So whoever was born a Russian citizen will be exempt from that. This is aiming at people that gained the Russian citizenship later in their life. They will also be threatened with losing it if they become a prisoner of war. So becoming a prisoner of war is now threatening you with losing your citizenship. And if you try to avoid being drafted into the armed forces, all of those now might lose their citizenship. And we are still having tons of videos and reports about complaints from soldiers, from family members, about training, about equipment, about food not being delivered, etc., etc. This is just ongoing and doesn't seem to be worth diving into it every single time. But I found more videos of soldiers all the time that are complaining like this. When we come to the political sphere, now there's a big news here. Putin has been facing massive criticism at the home front for the withdrawal from Kherson. And Alexander Dugin, who is a Russian philosopher and is usually called a right-wing extremist, he is sometimes being called his ideologue. So Putin's ideologue, like he's the thinker for the ideology that is leading Putin to do what he does. And he called the withdrawal treason, and he placed the responsibility for that on Putin's shoulders alone. He exempted Surovikin. He said that it's Putin's fault. If you're a dictator, if you're an autocrat, everything is your fault, and nobody below you can take blame because you are the only leader in the country. At the same time, he made literally a reference to literature where a king was killed after failing completely in his job. So it is seen, and it was reported that he was basically demanding or suggestion that Putin should be killed for his treason. The interesting part of his tirade was also that he made clear that the usage of nuclear weapons would be idiotic, and absolutely opposed it in the same context. Nationalists inside of Russia see the evacuation of Kherson generally as weakness and as treason, as it is giving up on the idea of Russian superiority. Obviously, if the Russians are superior to the Ukrainians, then they shouldn't be beaten. And by withdrawing, it's an admission to the fact that the Ukrainians might be superior in this regard. And Putin has lost a big part of his reputation in the nationalist camp. It's dramatically damaged, and while Russia, the civilian population, the civil society is obviously facing the results from sanctions, from mobilization, from martial law, so his support there will also be starting to fall. All in all, not really a good situation for Putin which he's facing right now. And we have a funny, more or less funny thing here, and that is a Russian military blogger, we see him here, actually wrote, is questioning where the big support that was reported in the annexation of Kherson, as the majority of the population didn't want to get evacuated, and cheered and praised the Ukrainian liberation. So he's asking, what about the 87%? I don't perfectly, to be perfectly honest, I don't really grasp that, whether the military bloggers in Russia actually believe that those referendi are genuine, that they are justified, whatever is said in them, that it might be true, as most of us in the West, at least the overwhelming majority, knows them as what they are, as they are a farce with a predetermined outcome. But in this regard, it's kind of a funny element that someone in Russia, a military blogger, is asking, have we been lied to in this regard? It has some irony in that. Russian military bloggers are also criticizing the military massively, because Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has been able to go to Kherson. He witnessed a flag raising there, and he was able to inspect the city without being any way threatened by the Russian military. And the military bloggers are asking, how is that possible that we allowed Zelensky to walk around in Kherson without attacking them? Obviously, no report about politics in Russia would be complete without mentioning Prigozhin. There was a video being spread around by one of the channels that is seen close to Wagner and thus to Prigozhin, and there was showed the execution, the killing, the murder, you should probably say, of a former Wagner mercenary, and it was said who returned through a prisoner exchange, but that doesn't make much sense, because the person in question, Yevgeny Nuzhin, said he was in Kiev walking around when he was hit on the head. So it's unclear where he was actually executed. Was he smuggled out of Ukraine, handed over to the Russians, or was he killed inside of Ukrainian controlled territory by some people, by some pro-Russians inside of this, also showing the difficulty and the danger that Ukraine might face of actually having troops like this roaming around in the Ukrainian countryside, in the Ukrainian capital, even being able to abduct and then execute people. Nuzhin has been a sentenced murderer who volunteered for Wagner, but he said to switch sides because his family is living in Ukraine and he didn't support Russia's war. Prigozhin himself said the executed person, Yevgeny Nuzhin, was a traitor to the Russian people, and he intended to flee to the Ukrainians, and he compared Nuzhin to the Russian elites that are using their private jets to flee from Russian problems. Prigozhin also asked the Russian general prosecutor to initiate an investigation into the governor of St. Petersburg, Alexander Beglov, because of high treason, as St. Petersburg still hasn't given Wagner the permission to construct the Wagner Center that he opened there. That's high treason now if you don't allow Wagner, an illegal organization according to the Russian constitution itself, which bans PMCs, when you don't give them building permission to set up a center. And on the Russian side, there is more and more talk of something that can only be called the theft of children. The Russian Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, and the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Marat Kusnulin said publicly that thousands of Ukrainian children have been brought to Russian families or are in Russian institutions. We have that here. That's Maria Lvova-Belova, who are, like she's saying, each child had the opportunity to choose from 3 or 4 families. Then they communicated via video link and already decided which family they were going to, and the psychologist took this compatibility into account. We're talking about children being handed over, and obviously it comes with the fact that she herself, I think, adopted a Ukrainian child, and she talked about Ukrainian children being adopted by Russians before. And here we have RIA Novosti, who said that thousands of children left Kherson to other regions of Russia and are now arrested in children's camps. That's what Deputy Prime Minister said in this context here. The Russians are also saying 40,000 Ukrainian children have been brought to Russia from Kherson province alone. So probably not just from the right bank, the now liberated bank of part of Kherson, but from the whole province. Ukrainian General Staff is saying the Russians also want to evacuate all the inhabitants of Rubishne, Kremina, and Severodonetsk. So Rubishne, Kremina, and Severodonetsk, all of them are supposedly being evacuated. So getting them away from the front line, and thus obviously also getting them away from the possibility to fall into Ukrainian hands again. This is the Ukrainian General Staff, and I haven't said it in this episode yet, so just a reminder, whenever we have an active war participant saying something that is especially in some direction of political interpretation that paints the opposing side in a very bad light, we need to keep it, understand it with a grain of salt. The Ukrainian side has been the less lying side in this war, but that doesn't mean they have not given false accusations in the past, and we should see it with some caution when they mention something like this. The UN General Assembly has now on Monday, yesterday, decided a resolution about the basics of future reparation payments by Russia to Ukraine. In the text, it is asking Ukraine to provide information about, document the damages that have been done in some kind of register. We have the information that 95 countries voted for it in New York. That allowed the necessary 2/3 majority, as 73 countries abstained, but 14 voted against it. Among them Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. We can see them here: Cuba, China, Central African Republic, Belarus, obviously, Eritrea again, Ethiopia also, Iran supported them, Mali supported them, Nicaragua, Russia itself, Syria, as we can expect, and Zimbabwe also supported it. But what we don't see here is one of the important nations, especially when we see there is Brazil. Brazil has not supported it, or not opposed it. It abstained here, and India, the same. India also abstained in the election. Medvedev got really mad of it. We have that posting here by Medvedev on Telegram, and he more or less said that every damage that was done by NATO and the US should also have reparations then, and he then said we can live without those United Nations in this context. Maybe he should be reminded that leaving the United Nations would also mean leaving your permanent seat in the Security Council. And there was a historic example when Russia didn't use its seat on the Security Council out of protest. That was the Korean War, and thus they failed to prevent a military support for South Korea, which then turned the whole UN to the side of the South Koreans against the communist North Koreans in 1950. That was it from the politics side. We have some more information here. We have some images appear supposedly showing protective gear being supplied by Iran that is now being used by mobilized Russian soldiers. We have the news that Germany is going to establish a maintenance hub in Slovakia to repair arms that were sent to Kiev. So among that will probably be the Panzerhaubitze 2000. Slovakia obviously being fairly close to Ukraine as it is here. So a direct connection more or less towards Germany, as close to the western part of Ukraine as it can be in outside of Poland. Also, Germany will train 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers in 2023. That was also committed in this context. Here we have a rare site. It's the Brimstone 1 missile that have been supplied to Ukraine by Great Britain. Brimstone is a really interesting system because it's developed from the Maverick rocket. and the fact that it's beyond visual, beyond the line of sight anti-tank missile that can be fired from the ground. You fire, as we can see here, 2 of those missiles out of a truck, and the missiles have a range of more than 12 kilometers, in which they activate seeker head. I think it's with the radar, and the seeker head, yeah, it's with the radar, and the seeker head is then looking for a target by himself to dive on it. So this allows you to maybe fight tanks that are even hidden behind a forest or something like this. So a very sophisticated and powerful system, tandem warhead, high penetration, so whenever a tank is being hit by it, it should be destroyed in this regard. And here now we have found the first video of them actually being used, supposedly at least, in Ukraine. When it comes to weapons, we have another news that the German company Rheinmetall is now buying a Spanish ammo company, a Spanish defense company that is specialized on producing ammunition. And among that, the important part is that this Rheinmetall said this company will then start producing Gepard ammunition, so for the German air defense tank that was handed over to the Ukrainians, where right now the issue is that there's no reliable source of ammunition for the Ukrainians, which are using them almost every day to, among other uses, to fight Shahid 136 to shoot them down. So we have in the future, at least, we can expect the ammunition situation to improve, but obviously this will probably take months to have an effect. Here we have an interesting video when it comes to the dragon teeth, where we've talked about in the past that are being established. This should be a BMP-2 from what we've seen, and we see Ukrainians driving here, and actually he's running them over and seem to be without any problem. He just seems to carry on. The only issue I have with that video is that we can see he probably saw them too late and was distracted. The issue we have is that the video stops in the very moment he has crossed them. If the video would continue for another 20 seconds and he would keep driving, it would be a bigger proof of anything. But if they aren't that big that you could maybe slide over them, shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But the next question will be, is the IFV after that, is it still usable? Is it still in a usable condition? Was it ripped open? Has it lost its tracks? Has it destroyed its hull or something like this? Everything that would confirm that they are actually fully useless. Unfortunately, we can't really see this here, even though it's being handed around as a proof of dragon teeth being useless. What we can see more or less, that if dragon teeth are positioned like this and of that size, then apparently an IFV with enough speed can more or less jump over them. But what we don't see is that this IFV afterwards is still in fighting condition, just to put it into some perspective. Here we have another video of I mentioned them in the past. This is one of the Russian designs of prefab bunkers. It's not one of the recent ones. The round ones were brought to Kherson months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. But you can see in the video here, we see it passing. Like, you see the strength, the width of the roof and of the walls. And I have to say, I'm not too impressed. An M2 should probably go through it like a hot knife through butter. And even assault rifles, if I see that strength here, and it doesn't look like it's reinforced with steel plates at some point, should probably be able to chew it through in a fair amount of time as well. But obviously it still provides protection. If the bunker stops the first 10 rounds of an assault rifle, it's still of some benefit, I guess. But it's an interesting perspective, because we for the first time see one of those bunkers being opened in a way that we can see its actual structure and the thickness of its walls in a fairly good way. Here I have a picture of 100 foreign fighters that have fallen for Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that's not including everyone. It's just that some were identified, 100 were identified and put together. And obviously you can find the whole list on the website, so you can look them up for yourself. What I found interesting was not just the high density of Georgian fighters, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise. We also see a lot of Belarusian fighters, but the interesting part to me was how many Azerbaijani fallen have been in there. And as we can see in the Americans audience, you see a couple of Americans being listed here. We even have an Austrian woman here. We have 2 Israelis, at least 2 Israelis, what I've seen here. Italians, we have, that should be Colombia, I think. Colombia, Denmark, Great Britain, Poland, Azerbaijan, Canada, Germany here, Japan, France, two French, that's Sweden, Netherlands, that should be Australia, I think. Australia and New Zealand, I sometimes have some issues. I think the big star in the south isn't there on the New Zealand flag, but I don't completely know. Brazil we see here, so it's really an international effort, international support for the Ukrainian side here. Several Brazilians here, and there was a Taiwanese as well. I can't find him right now. I talked about him in the past, and I've seen him on that list too, I'm sure. Somehow I can't find him right now. You will probably see him, have seen him. Oh, there he is. There he is. Okay, so this is just an example, and to introduce some personal, human perspective to the war, that those people here have decided deliberately to help Ukraine in its war effort and have paid the ultimate price for it. And one last thing is that we have a electromechanical plant that is currently on fire, and this Chania Helios runner has identified it as being a factory essential for the production of S-300V, Torem-1, Buchem-1, Strela 10, Tunguska, Shilka, Pantsir, so all air defense systems, and Tornadoes are long-range artillery rockets. So in general, supposedly a very important plant. Obviously, we can't judge whether that actually stops the production, to what degree, but another fire in a defense installation in Russia, it's not the first one, and it seems to be a little, quite a lot during that war, plants that have caught fire in Russia. That's it from now. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, then you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone having enjoyed it. If you want to support the channel, you can also hit the thumbs up to help with the algorithm. If you haven't subscribed yet, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. Recommend the channel to friends and acquaintances. If you think the way I do it, try to be not too biased, try to be as objective as I can, might be interesting to them. And obviously your comments are also highly appreciative. If you see that the Kinburn Spit invasion might actually have happened, and if you see a military sense in it, if you think it has that means an easier way to free Crimea or something like this, then obviously your input is highly appreciated, and any discussions about the topic really help the channel. So thank you so much for your support. I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.